This evening on Nationwide, a focus on an Irish village and the stories of the history and of the people who live there. We're in North Kerry, where the locals have all contributed to the making of a documentary telling the stories of their home place and its history. Our country is full of contemporary and historical stories that make our parishes and counties special. And this evening, we're looking at the work of a County Kerry husband and wife team who've made a full-length documentary about their local area. Ardfert is a small village of about 750 people, but in the 12th century, it was a large ecclesiastical centre with around 5,000 inhabitants.
We've got the lancet windows there.
Yeah. I'd say if we go for another shot later on from the inside, where we've got the light coming through.
Jim and Catherine McCarthy are local photographers, and over 2 years they filmed and edited their documentary in any spare time they could find. And recently, I went down to Kerry to meet them. Well, here in Phoenix, and James and Catherine have their photographic studio at the back of their house, which is just here. Anybody in? Hello. Nice to meet you, James.
You're very welcome, Mary.
Thank you very much, and Catherine. I'd imagine there can't be too many parts of Phoenix or too many people in Phoenix that you haven't photographed.
I think when you're a photographer, you really have to photograph everything. Where there's people, landscapes, seascapes. And then when you're on the road, then of course you do the communions and confirmations and the weddings and all this stuff.
Which is lovely. So you're very much part of the community.
Yeah, well, we hope we are anyway.
Yeah. So where did the idea for doing a full-length documentary on Ardfert, which is only about 5 kilometres away, where did it come from?
I think I come from a place called Kilmiley, and it's only a few miles from Ardfert. And Ardfert Cathedral, which is featured in the documentary, I actually worked there doing the archaeology back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I always thought that it would be great to do a documentary on Ardfert, on the history of Ardfert. So we set about, and of course it is a big undertaking, you know what I mean?
Well, that was going to be my next question. How long did it take?
Oh, it took nearly 2 years to make the documentary.
Wow.
And over 180 hours worth of film.
So, Catherine, 180 hours of material, and then it comes back and it lands on your desk, and then you've got to edit it. That must be a big task.
Oh, it is. That's where it's a bit of a nightmare at times, like. Because, I mean, you'd have the drone footage, you'd have all the interviews, and when you've been out on the
shoot.
On the shoot, yeah. I suppose we spend hours here. We could be here till 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes.
Really? Just wondering, in the documentary that you've done, is there any particular piece or any particular moment that really struck a chord with you as a Kerry man, as a filmmaker?
I think the piece on Roger Casement was unique because the story of the witnesses was never told properly. Ardfert got an awful bad name on the execution of Roger Casement because the witnesses were blamed for the execution of Roger Casement, which was totally untrue. So in the piece we did on Roger Casement, we tried to rectify that.
It's all about the human stories, isn't it? And James, you've certainly whet my appetite. And what we want to do on this evening's programme is to show you some excerpts from Ardfert, a historical gem. And given what James has just said, I can't think of a better place to start than with the piece about Roger Casement. Irish heroic figure Roger Casement landed in on top of the local community of Ardfert early on Good Friday morning in April 1916. His botched landing at Banna Strand, ready to receive a shipment of 20,000 German guns, had a massive impact on the community here. This is the only film in existence of Roger Casement, filmed in Berlin in 1915, a year before his execution for treason.
It was here on Banna Strand on Good Friday morning, April 21st, 1916, that Sir Roger Casement, along with his 2 companions, Robert Monteith and Daniel Julian Bailey, rowed ashore from the German submarine U-19.
When Casement, Monteith and Bailey, when they'd been making their way from the Strand over to the fort, they had to pass a farm, which was Allman's farm, and this would have been about 5 o'clock in the morning. So the first person up in the farmhouse was the farm servant, Mary Gorman. She happened to see these three men passing the farmyard. Later that morning, one of the labourers from the farm was up in the village, and there was obviously the word had gotten out that something strange had washed up on the shore, that there was a boat, that there might be Germans, and the farm labourer said, oh, well, they must have been the men that Mary Gorman spotted this morning. So this was confirmation 3 men had been there. Now, she herself didn't report that. And then at this stage, the boat was pulled up onto the beach. It was spotted by a local man, by John McCarthy. And of course, when he went to examine the boat, there were guns and, you know, there was all sorts of very suspicious looking things. He got a neighbour to go and report this to the RIC barracks in Ardfert. Because of what had been found on the boat, the place was suddenly now swarming with policemen searching, and they could, you know, there's 3 sets of footprints from the boat and all the rest of it. So the search was on for these strange men that had appeared.
A few hours after landing at Banna Strand, Casement and his companions made it to shelter at McKenna's fort. Casement was suffering from malaria, so the 2 others left him to build up his strength in the fort. People were on high alert for German spies, and it wasn't long before the RIC was in hot pursuit of the strangers. It was Constable Bernard O'Reilly who found Casement and pointed his rifle at the man in the long coat.
Constable O'Reilly arrived at the fort and saw the stranger. Straight away he raised his carbine and demanded to know who he was. Casement gave a false name, that of Richard Morton. As Roger Casement was being brought out of the fort, he was very conscious of the German code that he had in one of his pockets. He came to have that code because he swapped overcoats with Monteith earlier in the journey that morning. His overcoat was too heavy, he was ill, suffering from the after effects of malaria, and Monteith decided to give him his lighter overcoat and take Casement's heavier one. But Casement, as I said, saw the poignant trap, realised what he was going to be taking, and up to then he was very conscious of the German code in his pocket. He didn't realise it was going to be incriminating. He took it out with one of his pockets with one of his hands, put it behind his back, tore it in 2 or 4 pieces and let it fall to the ground.
2 local boys spotted the papers on the ground and handed them over to the RIC, not realising who the stranger in their midst really was.
Young Darling, who was a friend of Martin Collins, saw the bits of paper on the side of the road, ran over, picked them up and gave them to Martin Collins, who in turn gave them to one of the policemen. That was the German code that Monteith had been given in Berlin before he left Germany, which was to be used for further supplies for the volunteers on the assumption that the 1916 rising was going to be widespread and was going to go ahead.
A number of local people were subpoenaed and gave evidence at Casement's trial.
The evidence that they had was simple stuff. Mary Gorman, I saw 3 people. Martin Collins, I picked a bit of paper off the ground. John McCarthy, I found the boat on the beach. Simple little bit, but the English media twisted and twisted it because they wanted to portray Casement as a traitor.
The witnesses from Ardfert were, you know, just pawns in all of this. They were, you know, made to feel shame about what they had done. Do you know, unfairly, I think, very unfairly. This strange man who had wandered into their lives, you know, almost randomly, completely, for 2 of them anyway, you know, changed the course of their life, you know.
And when they came back to Ardfert, I mean, like, it was a different world again. And they had to fit in. And Mary Gorman herself, she was only a young girl. So she eventually went to America. And supposedly she died very, very young. And then there was John McCarthy and there was Martin Collins. They came back to Ardfert, but they lived their lives out. But they found it very hard. But there was always a stigma attached to the Ardfert people after that.
The witnesses from this area who were taken over against their will over to London for the trial of Casement, you know, like that they were completely innocent people, like, and they got blamed. This area got blamed, and sometimes they called Ardfert the Casement hangers. You know, it even happened in Tralee when Ardfert won the championship. A team called Tublin in 1917, and I think in that match they were called Casement hangers. Like, you know, and it was very wrong altogether. Like,
the people of Ardfert have nothing to be ashamed of, and it took over 100 years, and it's about time that wrong was righted.
When we showed the documentary in Sheem Satira, obviously we had a full house because the interest was there. Everyone knew there was a piece about Roger Casement in this documentary, and obviously people wanted to see it. Afterwards, when people have seen the documentary, they came up to me and they said, that was fantastic. That's the way it should have been told. And it should have been told 20, 30 years ago. Why did they have to wait till 2018 to be shown? So I was delighted with it, you know, and it was nice to rectify it. It was nice to say, like, the witnesses and the people of Ardfert were not to blame for the execution of Roger Casement.
These days, there's immense pride in Ardfert at having played a part in the story of Irish freedom. There are 3 monuments commemorating the events of that fateful Good Friday morning in April 1916.
The reason the bus is here today is that Ardfert Development Association in 2015 got together and decided it was important that we should mark the centenary of Roger Casement's landing in Banna Beach and his association with Ardfert. So the Development Association fundraised, and we were also lucky enough to get some allocation from the various county councillors, and in turn then we had enough money to make this possible. Joe Neeson sculpted the piece, which we were absolutely thrilled with and delighted with, because it's an incredible likeness to Roger Casement. And on the 21st of April 2016, we were honoured to have the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, come to our village and unveil the monument to Roger Casement. It was an incredible event, and probably one of the proudest moments of my life to be being associated with, and it was a great pleasure to welcome the President of Ireland to our village.
We're staying with the topic of Banna Strand, a very blustery and a very beautiful Banna Strand today, and we're bringing you right up to date with our next story.
Jim and Catherine featured the local voluntary group Banna Sea Rescue in their documentary. The organisation is available around the clock to assist with any emergencies that arise. The group is locally funded, and the annual Christmas swim helps in the purchase of equipment needed to provide this invaluable service.
I joined Banna Rescue because I'm originally from a local small fishing village, and these kinds of community or organisations are so important for locals.
Weather's rough enough today, nice tricky conditions. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some tricky launch and recovery, and then we're also going to do casualty recovery and man overboard.
We train out in the sea to make sure we avoid any mistakes for that critical moment in time. To avoid these mistakes, we also review all the training we do. We wear helmet cameras, body cameras, and when we come back from the sea, we actually look at the footage and check out our mistakes or see how we can actually improve what we've just done.
To become a member of Banna Sea Rescue, what sort of training's involved?
When you first sign up, you have a 6-month probation period, and during that time, you go to sea with them, you take control of the boat, you learn different knots, and you basically just go out as a crew member, and then after that time, they just see whether you're suitable for it or not.
First of all, I'm a member of the management committee, and obviously I act in my professional capacity as a medical doctor. During the winter months, I help to provide some first aid training. I don't go to sea, but I'm available to advise the crew on how to deal with any of the casualties, and I also attend any of the scenes of any incident that occurs if they require my help or my staff.
It was a great achievement then, and a great thrill, we'll say, to have achieved what we set out to do, that if something happened in Banna, that we had a rescue boat and a full crew to look after our beach.
and keep it safe for the tourists and for the locals alike.
Banna Sea Rescue are one of the agencies we work quite a lot with and work very well with them. I suppose throughout the country we couldn't do our job without the volunteers of likes of Banna Sea Rescue and all the other many agencies out there. Sometimes a helicopter's not your best option, and certainly the ground units are worth their weight in gold. Kids, if they're aware from a very early age, even from the school setting, if they're encouraged to understand, how to call for help and what to do, and understand that there's no negative impact to calling for help. And even if you're wrong, we would call that a call of good intent, so that you thought somebody was out to sea there, you thought he was waving or he got stuck on a surfboard, but then it transpired that he was actually fine. That's absolutely no problem with us. We have no problem attending them calls whatsoever. I think the earlier we call them, the more likelihood there is for a successful outcome.
Well, Cogordachas O'Cree le Gachtaine at Banna Sea Rescue for providing such an invaluable service in this part of the country. We're going to take a break now, and when we come back we'll be looking at what was discovered during excavations at the nearby cathedral in Ardfert. So we'll talk to you again in a couple of minutes, unless we're blown away in the meantime. Tá fáilte roimh arás. You're welcome back to Nationwide, and you're welcome back to Ardfert in County Kerry, where this evening we're featuring the work of husband and wife team James and Catherine McCarthy, who've made a feature-length documentary about their area. Now, this magnificent cathedral has been the focal point in Ardfert for more than 800 years, and the McCarthys have told of its history in their documentary.
One of the most striking features of Ardfert is the magnificent 13th century cathedral, which is built on the site of an earlier monastic settlement founded by St. Brendan in the 6th century. Between the years 1989 and 1998, major archaeological excavations and conservation works took place at Ardfert Cathedral. Archaeologists unearthed some very significant finds and gained valuable insight into what life was like in early times and right through the Middle Ages.
The main driving force behind this project was the local community, in particular the Ardfert Community Council. And a major challenge, of course, was then getting permission from the local people who had their own flesh and blood buried here in the cathedral and the grounds, to get their permission to have the remains exhumed. And they did, which was an enormous achievement.
Overall, during the excavations between the nave, the north wall, the south aisle, the south transept, excavating inside and outside the cathedral, 2,300 odd medieval burials, intact medieval to late medieval burials, were uncovered and recorded. And detailed plans made of those, which will be part of the illustration of the forthcoming volume on the excavations. So those burials, we could identify them as early medieval. Some were associated with early medieval artifacts like coins, for example, bone comb in one case dating 10th or 11th century, and you've got coins then from Ardfert dating from the 11th century right up to the 17th century.
Kind of information that skeletal remains can tell us. You can work out, or the experts can work out, the age of the person at death, whether they were male or female, whether they had challenges growing up, whether they suffered from rickets, things like that, if they had strains on their body indicating that they'd carried heavy loads, if they had broken bones that healed or perhaps didn't heal, and that might have been the cause of death. All of these things can be found from skeletal remains.
During the excavations in 1991, I think it was, a major find, a burial inside the east window of the cathedral, slightly flexed and not fully on the orientation of the cathedral. A male adult burial with a ring on his right hand. The ring itself had a setting in it, carnelian setting. It's an intaglio ring or a seal ring. It had a setting of a carnelian with an image carved into that of the god Apollo, the Roman god Apollo. So it was used more than likely as a seal ring and reset into a ring of maybe 11th to 12th century date. The dating might tie in with a historical figure we know, a bishop called David of Dietrich, who was Bishop of Ardfert in the late 12th century, who had to go to Rome to see Celestine III, the Pope at the time, and was given recognition as the Bishop of Kerry and came back here. And who knows, maybe he came back here with that ring, and maybe that's the burial that we uncovered.
Now, Finbar, we're standing here in the rubble and what remains of the old round tower. But would it have been a large structure?
Well, we don't know how tall it was, but it was reputed to be the tallest round tower in Ireland. In the 11th century and 12th century, they built these towers, these round towers, possibly as places of refuge, because they were very hard to climb. They could pull up the ladders or as they went up through the various floors. They were called bell towers, or cligtoch, which means a bell tower or a bell house. And there's a possibility that a bell was rung from the top of the round tower, a hand bell rung from the top of the round tower to bring the monks and the lay workers in the monastery to their prayers or meals. We are standing here in the rubble of the tower because even though a lot of the stones from it were removed for building houses locally or building walls locally, and as I might have told you once, Eamon Kirby brought me to a house not too far from here that was clearly built from stones from the round tower, probably shortly after it fell. It can be seen from the air very clearly. They are impressive structures. They really stand out in the landscape, any that survive to this day. So this would have been like a beacon, and this is a very elevated area, so this round tower would have been seen for miles around.
So we're here now in the south transept, and it's a fantastic building altogether, and the roof is fantastic.
Yes.
There must have been a tremendous amount of work gone into this.
There was. It had been decided that there needed to be a visitor facility here, a facility for the guides, also to provide exhibition for some material that came up in excavation, and to have an exhibition. So you needed a roofed building to do that. So this is an authentic looking. It's made in the 20th century, but it's an authentic a style of roofing in oak from the period. So a lot of attention went into that type of detail, and it gives people an idea of what the church would have been like here at that time.
The archaeological excavations undertaken here turned out to be extremely significant. The building itself is now standing, hopefully for another 1,000 years. We have a story told, but there's more stories to tell about Ardfert. And maybe in the future there'll be more archaeology uncovered here to reveal more of the site and its history.
Beautiful work this evening from the McCarthys, and all taken from their documentary on Ardfert. If you'd like to get any further details, or if you'd like to get a DVD, you can go to their Facebook page. Just put in the words Digimac Photography and that'll take you there. And so we come to the end of this evening's programme. Hope you've enjoyed our visit to Ardfert in County Kerry. It's always a pleasure to be back in the kingdom. Sin deir leis an glór, on na hainne ar a bhur an iho hagwibh agus go déisih slán.